Live Fit Podcast, episode 59. On this week's Wednesdays with Will discusses the philosophy of Western medicine.
Western medicine is based on Newtonian thinking. Newtonian thinking says the whole is nothing other than the sum of the parts. Einsteinian thinking says the whole is much bigger than the sum of the parts. And you sometimes cannot figure out why the whole is or is not working just by understanding the parts.
You're listening to the Live Fit Podcast with Glenn Johnson. Here, we'll talk about all things related to good health, fitness, food, fat loss, and the mind-body connection.
Yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Johnson. This is episode 59. This is also the second Wednesdays with Will episode. Today, Will is going to be telling us about the difference between Western medicine and Eastern medicine. He's going to break it down into Newtonian philosophy versus Einsteinian philosophy, and that's what you heard at the beginning of the show. Will's also going to answer a question at the end of the show from a listener. If you have a question for Will or myself, feel free to use the SpeakPipe app I have. You can leave a voicemail right there on my website or through your smartphone. Go to livefitlean.com. Also, feel free to send me an email at glenn@livefitlean.com. And if you're not currently on the newsletter, I'd recommend you sign up. I send my newsletter out about once a week. It includes information about my latest articles, podcasts, some recipes, and general ways to help you live fit. With that out of the way, let's get on with Wednesdays with Will as he discusses Newtonian versus Einsteinian philosophies regarding medicine. Will.
In consideration of various medical, if you will, or medical care approaches, I think it's wise to question what are the basic philosophical tenets of one approach versus another. What is the thinking behind this approach? I want to answer that in a way that might sound somewhat complex, but it actually breaks it down to bare bones. Western medicine is based on Newtonian thinking. Newtonian thinking says the whole is nothing other than the sum of the parts. And it was in fact founded on this principle, which said, if we want to understand how the human body works, let's break it down into its individual parts, cells, tissues, organs. Let's study each one of those. And if we understand each of those individually, we'll understand how the whole thing works. In fact, let's take it a step farther. Let's break ourselves down into specialists who just work on one part, so that if someone's having a breakdown, they can go to that specialist to work on that part that isn't working properly. It would be kind of like looking at an old-fashioned pocket watch that wasn't working. If it wasn't working, chances are you could take off the back with a scope or a magnifying glass. You could study all of the parts of that pocket watch. And I'm talking about a pocket watch made in 1940 or earlier, where you wind a spring, which turns a screw, which is attached to a sprocket, which turns other sized sprockets. And if that clock wasn't telling time, chances are you could study all the parts and you could go, look at, there's a tooth missing from that sprocket, or there's some rust on that one, and it's not turning in proper time. That's why it's not working. So you take the sprocket out, you put a fresh one in, it works. The chiropractic approach is based on Einsteinian thinking. Einsteinian thinking says the whole is much bigger than the sum of the parts. And you sometimes cannot figure out why the whole is or is not working just by understanding the parts. In other words, it's the coordinated action and perhaps even the movement of electrical activity or energy through the parts working together that makes the whole function. But if something goes wrong, in truth, sometimes it's like looking at a modern LED watch. If it wasn't telling time, you'd take off the back, you'd look at it under a scope, and you'd go, what? I can't make heads or tails out of that. It's a battery. I can't tell if that battery's working, and there's a circuit board, and I can't look at that. So it looks fine. I don't know what's wrong with this watch. It regards the energy moving through those parts as an integral part of the function of the whole. So when we adjust the spine, we're not just putting the parts right. We're trying to create a change in the parts to stimulate improved flow of neurological and nervous system energy through the whole to stimulate the healing process. I think that I can't get any more concise than that in explaining a basic philosophical difference in one versus the other. But one thing is clear. When one goes to a medical doctor, unless you are going for surgery or trauma care, which in modern day medicine is nothing short of incredible, that is the capacities of modern medicine to address trauma, internal bleeding, to use MRIs to make diagnoses, surgical techniques to bypass clogged arteries, if you will, surgical techniques to remove tumors or impediments to normal blood flow, nothing short of remarkable. But the truth is, 80% of people go to the doctor not for one of those things. They go to the doctor because of symptoms. A symptom is nothing other than an indication that something isn't working right, or attention is not properly being given to a need. For example, the person who drinks 4 sodas a day, goes to a drive-through every day for lunch, might begin developing the symptom of GI discomfort, excessive gassiness, abdominal pain, maybe even some kind of bleeding disorder, in which case we would say that giving you something to reduce gas or reduce pain or to stop the bowels from contracting in the case of someone who's got diarrhea would be actually ridiculous. And yet typically that's how those things are treated. That is, the patient who's got heartburn is told, oh, you have too much stomach acid. Here, we're going to give you a pill to make you stop releasing acid. That's very Newtonian. And it's paying heed only to the symptom rather than the cause of that symptom. So the goal is the goal should be ultimately to find the cause of that symptom, correct that, whether it's lifestyle, structure, the nature of the patient's work, inadequate water consumption, poor sleep, excessive stress, etc., fix that, and then see what happens to the symptom.
That's awesome, Will. You know, I have a listener question for you. You want to answer one? Sure. This is from Mary in Camas, Washington. She says, what's your favorite back exercise?
My favorite back exercise. Wow, that's a tall order to ask for just one. I'm going to have to say, since lower back pain is so incredibly prevalent, my favorite back exercise is not even a back exercise. It's abdominal crunches. Because a really tight, tense, overworked low back, which often causes back pain, is almost always associated with a tight, excessively strong, deep low back muscle called the psoas. And by the way, that's spelled P-S-O-A-S. Should anyone care to Google that? It's a really fascinating muscle. It's the primary hip flexor. And when that muscle is tight, like it is in a high proportion of cases of people, it causes the low back to overarch. And that overarching of the low back basically jams the low back and can cause chronic low back pain. Classic signs of a tight psoas are that when you get up out of a chair, your tendency is to go, oh boy, and you want to lean back because your low back is so tight. Prolonged standing in one place, like shopping, waiting in a line, waiting in lines at an amusement park, causes your back to get achy. That's classic indicator of tight psoas. the antagonist to that muscle, the muscle that battles the psoas and has the potential to negate, to wipe out its tension, are the abdominal muscles. So if your abdominals are weak and your psoas is strong, your back is really going to overarch. If your psoas is tight but your abdominals are really strong, you can deal with that. And your abdominals can keep your psoas from excessively tightening. But I really open up a Pandora's box of confusion by even suggesting that, because in the gym I often see people, quote, strengthening their abdominal muscles, but they're actually strengthening their psoas muscles. For example, if you lay on your back and with your legs straight, you do leg lifts, floor, point the feet toward the ceiling, then back down to the floor. If you do old-fashioned sit-ups where your feet are pinned under something and you come all the way up to your knees with your chest. If you lay on your back and you do bicycles with your feet going down and outward. In fact, you're strengthening your psoas primarily. Your abdominals are only assisting. So the only way to really strengthen your abs without strengthening your psoas is to do abdominal crunches when there is, in fact, no movement at the hips. That's an odd concept. So really what that means is to do a proper abdominal crunch, you lay on your back, knees bent, tilt the pelvis. By that, I mean push your low back arch flat against the floor and hold that position the entire set of exercises, of reps. With the hands behind the head and neck, keeping the face parallel to the ceiling, and using your hands to hold the weight of the head. Lift the head, neck, shoulders up off the floor until your shoulder blades leave the floor, and then you head back down to the floor. And going nice and easy at a 1,000, 2,000 pace. In 15 reps, your abdominal muscles will be, at least initially, somewhat screaming at you. 3 sets of those, ideally in the morning and in the evening, and in 1 week you'll feel a difference in your low back. They're remarkably effective if at the same time you're not strengthening your psoas. I know, Glenn, you asked a really simple question, and I gave you a really complex answer.
Well, I think it's great to give a thorough answer, Will. It's not a problem at all. And I'm going to have either some images or a video of a proper crunch on the show notes page. So I'll make sure to put that on there. Well, thank you once again, Will. I will talk to you again next Wednesday.
Right on. Let's do that. This is fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Fit podcast. Please keep those reviews coming in iTunes and Stitcher Radio. You can subscribe, read show notes, articles, resources, and learn more about the weight management programs at livefitpodcast.com.